Hello and welcome to the Golden Playbook. Today we're going over the really early 2025 rankings. I always like to do this, shortly after the previous season has ended, because a lot of our thoughts and feelings on players, because you've just seen them play, just seen what they produce, are actually more accurate now than at the end of the summer once training camp, mini camps, all these players get all this buzz and hype, because we have nothing else to go off, nothing else to, feed our football addictions. So I like to do these early rankings just to know what I was thinking before all the hype and the buzz and the news comes out. That way I can know if I've maybe changed too much on a guy for better or for worse. Today is going to be the part one. So we're going over the quarterbacks and running backs. If you want to see the receivers and tight ends, subscribe and stay tuned for next week's video. That'll be coming out next Saturday. With that being said, let's jump straight into it. We'll head into the quarterbacks. No big surprises here. And I'll kind of break it into tiers of, groups of players that I think are similar. Only a little bit might be edging them out over another player. And for me, it's the first four quarterbacks on my list are the first tier. So that's Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Jayden Daniels, and then Jalen Hurts. Obviously Allen coming off the MVP season. You'll notice all of these guys have the rushing upside, which is huge for fantasy. Both rushing yards and touchdowns are obviously a huge boost on top of the normal passing stats. But I expect Allen's cast to get a little bit better. Even if they don't add a huge name, all their young guys will be getting a year better, a year more mature. He doesn't need much convincing to take that early. Same goes for Lamar. He's a video game type player, really fun to root for, really fun to watch. He's just a guy you like to have on the fantasy team, and he's going to put up numbers each and every season. He could have been MVP this year for his third MVP. The top guys don't need any convincing, honestly. And then the big riser is Jayden Daniels. Obviously coming off the huge rookie season, led the Commanders deep into the playoffs, which was very exciting for them. Obviously lots of upside with Jayden Daniels from the passing standpoint, from the running standpoint. Would love to see if he could get a few more rushing touchdowns to his name, and that would probably make him number one on this list. But I don't want our recency to be too much. Still going to be, sophomore season. We saw guys like CJ Stroud take a step back, actually. Not that I'm expecting that out of Jayden Daniels, but rightfully so, he's going to be in our 3 spot. And then to round out that first tier, in my opinion, is Jalen Hurts. Definitely at the bottom of the tier, but you can pencil him in for 10 to 12 rushing touchdowns, which automatically boosts the value just so much. As long as the tush push doesn't get banned, which I doubt it will, but, Green Bay's sorry butts are trying to get it banned. But Hurts gets obviously many touchdowns off that, which is great for fantasy. Sorry for the interruption, everyone. Copper told me he had a really important message to tell you guys, so here he is.
Please make sure you guys subscribe. My dad told me once we hit 100 subscribers, we get to eat thick cut bacon. So please subscribe. Thank you very much.
Moving on to the next tier. It's a not as obvious tier break. I'd probably put Burrow and Mahomes in that next tier of just two guys. We've obviously seen what Burrow could do this last year, putting up video game numbers from a passing standpoint. Doesn't provide the rushing upside that we saw from those top 4 guys, but a lot up in the air still. We'll see if Jamar signs. We're expecting. We'll see if T. Higgins signs. That'll be a big one. He's obviously played a huge role as their wide receiver too. So we got to see, a lot of moving pieces there that'll, influence rankings for sure. And then Mahomes coming off a down year, even though the volume was high, I expect him to get back into the top 5 this year. Top 6, but I think he'll have a nice solid year this year and might be in the conversation for MVP. Moving on, I've got a little bit of a dart throw here, and I've put Bo Nix at the 7 spot. We'll see if he stays there throughout the offseason. But I just really think that Sean Payton wants him to be his next Drew Brees, with the added bonus that he can actually move, he can run a bit. We saw him scoot for lots of rushing yards last year and a few rushing touchdowns. I just think he'll be able to play point guard very well. They actually have some decent playmakers. I'm assuming they'll add to it. I really think he's going to be able to spread the ball around and put up some good fantasy numbers. Whether that translates to good football play will remain to be determined, but I think he could be in line for a good fantasy season. And then Goff is just, is the most unsexy player on the board by far, but the players around him are sexy. You want to attach yourself to the Gibbs and the Amon-Ra's of the world, and Goff just has so many playmakers to get the ball to. He's going to put up the numbers. Whether we like it or not, he's going to finish top 10, and it's very unsexy to do. Next, we have Baker, the people's champ. Baker's kind of got that chip on his shoulder and has just put up massive stats the last couple of years with Mike Evans, of course. We'll see if Godwin is healthy, one, and then two, if he ends up signing back with Tampa Bay. Obviously, going to be a lot to determine in free agency and the draft. And then to round out my top 10, Justin Herbert. We caught a glimpse of what he can do with Ladd last year. I'm assuming they'll add to it. Underrated mobility. I think he needs to rush a little bit more to move up in this tier, because if you could add that to his numbers, he'd be scary, because the talent is undeniable with Justin Herbert. Moving on to that next grouping of players, I kind of put the next 3 or 4 guys in a tier as well. That'd be Brock Purdy, CJ Stroud, Kyler Murray, and Dak Prescott. Brock Purdy is, similar to Goff in that he has a lot of players to get the ball to. Obviously a lot up in the air with Debo being traded potentially. McCaffrey's health is, paramount to his success, and we saw last year he had a little bit of a down year because McCaffrey wasn't on the field. And then CJ Stroud, we were expecting big things this past year. I think he'll kind of, progress his play. With Nico being an undeniable stud, they just need to add one more piece. I feel like I'm saying that for every team, but a lot of these top teams need, one more piece, so they're not reliant on their 1 or 2 guys. And then Kyler, I feel like, we're all high on Kyler every year, but his play is just so inconsistent. He really could be in that top tier guys that have the rushing and the passing, but his play is just so inconsistent. I don't know if it's him, the coaching. It's going to be hard to trust, Kyler in that Arizona squad until we can really see, some consistency out of them. And then Dak was a tough one for me, coming off the injury, coming off not looking very good. He's obviously getting older, but him and CeeDee Lamb's connection is undeniable. And so we really have to see how that plays out. Another team that needs one more piece and a running game, but Dak always seems to put up the numbers when he's playing, so we'll see. And then a string of younger guys here: Caleb Williams, Jordan Love, Drake May, Anthony Richardson, Michael Penix. Caleb, we saw great things for a rookie season, the rushing upside. A lot of those rookies last year had good rushing numbers. Obviously could pass the ball. Now that Shane Waldron's out of there, big things coming. I really like Caleb to take a step forward this year. I think he might find a way to slowly climb up the rankings. And then Jordan Love, they're just a really run-heavy team right now. They like relying on Josh Jacobs, and until that changes, he's not going to be able to move much up my rankings. Drake May, I might have him a touch high. I might be overacting a little bit to his upside on the rushing, but I think he's got a good group of playmakers, young guys that'll, they're going to slowly progress. Maybe not at the rate we're hoping, but I think the progression will be there for sure. And then Anthony Richardson, I put him as low as I can put him. Obviously the physical talent is there. We haven't seen it from a throwing the ball standpoint, and so there's Anthony Richardson truthers, and I'm not one of them. So he's going to remain low, and I'm likely not going to own him in any leagues, which is fine by me. And then Michael Penix, we saw a few games from him at the end of the last season. He looked good. I mean, easy to stay with the small sample size. That's why he's not higher. Obviously, if he had a few more games to show off what he could do, he might rise up these rankings. All indication looks like he's a stud, and they've got lots of weapons. And then rounding out that top 20 is Darnold. We'll have to see where he lands, if he just goes back with Minnesota or one of these other teams that'll really kind of change where he's at in the rankings. But I'm still not fully convinced on Darnold being, what he was last year. I feel like Kevin O'Connell is a real mastermind and can make a lot of people look good. So we'll have to see where Darnold ends up in this situation. Moving on, I've only filled out to 25. Obviously, I haven't put rookies into my rankings yet. I want to see where they land. So I just have the 5 more guys. Once quarterbacks, rosters, teams are set, I'll obviously be able to fill this out further. But we have Bryce Young, Geno Smith, Trevor Lawrence, Matthew Stafford, and Derek Carr. Bryce showed glimpses at the end of last season, which was really surprising. I like everyone else, had wrote him off. I'll be very interested to see if he can kind of keep taking those steps. Geno, I mean, he always continues to put up the numbers. So if he stays in Seattle with JSN and DK, I have to rise him up my rankings. But for now, until we know more on the situation, I'm just going to comfortably put him down here in the 20s. T-Law, coming off the injuries, never really looked that good when he was healthy. And like I've said a few times in my videos, Shane Waldron's coming to town as the passing game coordinator, which I'm very wary of, very wary. So he's going to be low in my rankings, probably lower than most for a while. And then lots of Matthew Stafford buzz right now. Potential trades, Giants, Raiders. LA wants to keep him as far as we know. But he really didn't look great at the end of last season. Another guy we have to see where he ends up. And then rounding out Derek Carr, the most unsexy pick of all time. He's really just a placeholder until rookies are put in place. Enough said. Let's move on to the running backs now. These guys are a little bit more fun to talk about, a little more volatility throughout the rankings. The tiers are a little less obvious, but let's run through them. To start off, I like the top three guys in my first tier: Bijan, Saquon, and then Jahmyr Gibbs. Bijan, you can pencil him in for 20 points a game as a floor and just be really comfortable playing him. He hasn't really shown that breakaway touchdown speed that I was expecting, that Saquon showed us last year. But I really expect his consistency and everything just to thrive with Michael Penix. So I currently have him as my number one. Not far behind is Saquon. What he did last season was undeniable. The only thing that's probably stopping him from being number one is that he gets his touchdowns vultured from Hurts quite a bit. Like I said, Hurts is at least a 10 to 12 touchdown guy, and that's going to just take off Saquon's touchdowns. But other than that, Saquon is, obviously a home run waiting to happen. And then last guy in the tier is Jahmyr Gibbs, another guy who could, be viable for the number one. That would be if Monty wasn't there. With David Montgomery being there, he's got to fall down just a little bit, because there'll be times where you won't see him for most of the first quarter, which is a little bit scary, but he's an explosive enough guy that it doesn't really matter. If Montgomery was to get injured or whatever, obviously he shoots up to the number one spot for me, because his explosiveness is just so amazing and fun to watch. Moving on, we got some bell cows that are just below the tier of amazingness that the top three are, but really not that far behind. And that's Jonathan Taylor, Josh Jacobs. I'll even put Devon Achane in that. His workload is a little bit different, obviously, we'll get to. But Jonathan Taylor, Josh Jacobs, 20 carries a game, 10, 12 rushing touchdowns easily. You're getting the volume, and that's what you want out of your running back one. Know that you're getting the volume. Unless it's an explosive piece like Gibbs, then you don't have to rely too much on it. Moving on, Achane, he gets his volume differently, obviously, in the passing game. Tua in their offense right now loves checking the ball down, 4, 5, 6 catches a game. In a PPR, that really adds up. Obviously, in standard or half point, he shoots down the rankings quite a bit just because his receiving numbers are so massive. I could see him having, a prime Alvin Kamara season, 80 catches, 6 to 8 touchdowns, 1,400 yards total. So moving on, some more guys that should really be bell cows, and that's James Cook, Bucky Irving, Kyron Williams, and Derrick Henry. All guys who should be scoring lots of touchdowns, be involved in the passing and the rushing outside of Derrick Henry. The one I'd be most concerned about in this moment is Kyron. Did have the fumbling issues. He's a 5th round pick. I know they've showed loyalty to him, but I expect, some competition coming for him, whether that's Blake Corum, who's already in the room, or draft or free agency this year. I expect, a little competition for Kyron to light a fire unders, but let's move on. Next, I couldn't go really any farther without putting these couple of guys: Christian McCaffrey, Breece Hall, top 3 running backs in last year's rankings. Situations really aren't that different. It's just, the recency bias that injuries and not playing well last year. But, these guys' talents are undeniable. There's a good chance they'll end up moving up the rankings as, reports are coming out that they're looking really solid. Especially McCaffrey. He's obviously a league changer when healthy. Moving on, we got Chase Brown, Alvin Kamara, Chuba Hubbard, Joe Mixon. Got a mix of young and old, new to the scene, been there for a while. If Chase Brown's role remains the same, that is is a home run pick at my 13th rank. Alvin Kamara, obviously I love the guy. We'll have to see what the role is. I expect them to bring in some competition, but it seems like they do that every year, and he just remains getting 80-85% of the snaps. So, and then Chuba was fresh on the scene. I don't expect Jonathan Brooks to really be back in the mix, so it should be Chuba's backfield as far as I'm concerned. And then Joe Mixon, we'll see if he can keep doing it, man. He feels really old, but hey, if he's doing it, he's producing. At the end of last season, his efficiency went down quite a bit, so we'll have to see how that goes. And then this tier is really a mix of young and old. We got Tyrone Tracy, young stud, will be going into his sophomore season. If the Giants get a quarterback, I really like Tracy this year. And then some old guys to finish out the tier here. James Conner, David Montgomery, Aaron Jones. Obviously, Jones' status, he's a free agent, so we'll see where he lands. James Conner, I'd be most worried about on this list. I feel like, his injuries and his carries, his workload will be catching up to him. Monty's obviously, got Gibbs to compete with, but he produces when he's on the field. And like I said, we'll see where Aaron Jones lands. He might shoot up or down depending on the situation. All right, moving on to that 21 through 30. This is where the names get a little bit tougher. Obviously, less certain roles and more a little bit of prediction. But let's get right into it. We got Tony Pollard, DeAndre Swift, and Kenneth Walker. I have those guys in a tier. Personally, I think Pollard's role will remain strong with Tennessee. We'll love to see what they do at quarterback. I know they want to get Spears more involved, but Pollard's talent's undeniable. So we'll see how that workload seems like it'll be shaping up. I'm sure they'll start it out as a 50-50 workload, but Pollard always seems to kind of get the lion's share there. DeAndre Swift, he's going to be the starter in Chicago. He might end up shooting up my rankings a little bit. I'm not a huge believer in the talents as a runner. I really don't think he's that great. He's just athletic. But he's going to get the touches and he's going to be in an offense with a lot of playmakers and should be exciting to watch this year, the Chicago Bears. And then Ken Walker, a guy I've been really high on. As a Seattle fan, I was never high on Charbonnet. But at times last season, Charbonnet looked like the better back. I don't know if Walker was still fighting back through injuries. Obviously, the O-line has been horrible for decades, but that'd be the case for both running backs. So unless they address that, I'm really a little bit weary of Walker this year. He did not look great at the end of last season. And then this next group of guys is a little bit ugly. A lot of just hard-nosed runners that we have to see what their role is going to become. And that's Brian Robinson, J.K. Dobbins, Isaiah Pacheco, and Ramondre Stevenson. Robinson, obviously a great runner, does not catch the ball much at all. So that really kills him in PPR. We'll see if they still have Eckler next year. Kind of to be determined on Robinson's role. And then Dobbins, another free agent. We've got to see where he falls. Pacheco, he really did not look good coming out the injury last season. It was a pretty serious injury, broken bone in his leg. So if he's back to what he was doing at the 2023 season, Pacheco might shoot up the rankings a little bit. I doubt they bring Kareem Hunt back, but you never know. And then Ramondre Stevenson, I just don't know. I know they paid him last offseason, but I think he might be close to getting phased out. Had fumbling issues, really isn't that explosive of a runner. But if he keeps his role, he's going to be an 8 to 10 touchdown guy, so we'll see what the role is. Moving on, we got Rachaad White, Najee Harris, Jaylen Warren. Rachaad obviously got overtaken by Bucky. Rachaad was never really a good runner. He was mostly a pass catcher. But with that said, they were using him quite a bit. Lots of touchdown upside with him. So we'll kind of see if he has any role left. And he might have to shoot down the rankings if they're going to make it really just a Bucky show. Najee, free agent. We'll see where he lands. And then we'll see if Jaylen Warren is going to be the next up for Pittsburgh. That really doesn't seem like the prototype to me for their starting running back. In Pittsburgh, they like a hard-nosed, tough, bigger back to kind of wear teams down, and that's just not what Jaylen Warren is. So we'll really see if they bring someone else in. And then finally, this last grouping for now, we have the 31 through 40 range. A lot of these are kind of backup handcuff guys. Like I said, I don't have the rookies in here. So once they're in, these guys will kind of move down a tier or so. But for now, we got Travis Etienne, Tyjae Spears, Tank Bigsby. I still have to put Etienne above Bigsby just from a receiving standpoint, although Etienne hasn't looked like a great runner in a while. Really don't want any part of that Jacksonville backfield in this moment. Spears, like I said earlier, probably going to start at a 50-50 workload. Looked decent at the end of last year, but hasn't been able to stay healthy very much. And then Tank, really no interest. I just had to put him in for his running abilities. He did break off some runs last year, which is a little surprising. We'll see what his role is, if he goes back to a rookie load or what he kind of had last season. And then next is mostly, backup handcuff guys that will be good starters if the starter goes down. And that's Charbonnet, Algier, Jerome Ford, Trey Benson, Jalen Wright, Blake Corum, Ray Davis. Obviously, Sharp has a little bit more of a role than just your average, handcuff. Especially, like I said, Walker didn't look great, so we'll see Sharp's role. Algier's just a straight up handcuff to Bijan. Jerome Ford, I doubt he'll be the starter in Cleveland, but until further notice, he's got to be up here. Benson, James Conner, has been volatile in his career, so we'll see if Benson earns that backup role. He'd be a good piece to handcuff. Jalen Wright, obviously H-Hands, Corum for Kyron, and Ray Davis for James Cook. All guys that are just really backup handcuff values. Like I said, those move down the rankings with the rookies coming in. And that's going to do it for part 1 of my 2025 rankings. Obviously, this was the quarterbacks and the running backs. If you want to see the wide receiver tight end part 2 video, subscribe and stay tuned for next week's video. We'll be dropping on Saturday. Until then, please comment down below someone you're higher or lower on. Maybe a guy you're really going to take a shot on this year. Other than that, thank you guys so much for watching, and stay tuned for more.